let's have a detailed overview of our newly created ReactJS application. Most of the beginners are afraid of all the files and the folders that we have in the React application, and they actually don't know how to interact with them. And what does these files actually do? Believe me, the structure of this ReactJS application is straightforward. And as a beginner in the ReactJS ecosystem, you must have a very solid information or the knowledge about this structure so that you feel yourself comfortable while working with the React. So in this lecture, we will have detailed overview of this React.js application structure, try to understand the connections and how different files talking to each other. And in the second part of this lecture, we will prepare the React.js application for coding and understand some basic concepts. As you see, our project is running in the browser and it comes with some default HTML markups and the CSS. Let's now have a look at the key files and the folders in this project. At the top, we have Node modules, and this is a folder where the third-party libraries like React, dependencies, and other resources are installed. If I expand this folder, you will see a long list of folders and files inside it. So all the third-party libraries and the dependencies are installed in this project. You will never have to touch this folder. Now, let's just say you remove this folder. You shouldn't have to do that, but accidentally you remove this folder, delete this folder, or any other folder or file inside it. Then you can simply get it back using the npm install. So let's do an experiment. I'm going to delete this folder, modules folder, and I see. So you see the folder is gone. Now we can get it back using the npm install. So open the terminal and write the command npm install. The command took some time because there were so many packages to install, but you can see our modules folder is back. Try to run the project. Once again, write the command npm run dev. Now you see the local URL. Nothing wrong with this project. Copy this URL, open a new tab in the browser, paste the URL and press enter. Now you see the default React page. Let me just close the terminal so you can see if something is wrong with this node modules folder, so you can get it back. You can fix it using the npm install command. Next, we have public folder. This is where the public assets of our websites are placed, like images and video files. As you open the folder, you will see the Vite logo is placed inside this public folder, and the logo you see here on the page. Now, before we look into the source folder, this is where you spend most of your time as developer. Let's just have a look at the package.json file. It's a key file in our project. In this file, you can simply find the information about the project, like the name of the project, in the version, some scripts, and the dependencies. Currently, we are depending on two libraries, React and React DOM version 80. And we also have some development dependencies. These are only used for development. So that is a package.json file, an important file with some important information. And here we have Vite config.js. The project is created using the Vite, so the Vite plugin is also there. And I just want to remind you, if you don't know how to create React.js project using Vite, then I have already a tutorial on it on my channel. Let's now move on and click on the index.html file. This is the file which actually runs in the browser. You know, React is a single page application, and that single page is this index.html, and it will mostly look like this, a simple HTML template, and inside the body, we have two very important tags. First, we have a div with the ID root, and this is where the components are inserted via the JavaScript or the JSX. So unlike a common HTML file, we don't put content directly here inside the div. The content is placed via the components. Here is our index.html file running in the browser, and you see there is some content in it. By default, this component is inserted in the root div, and that's why you see this output. We can confirm it using the dev tool. Open the dev tool. Inside the body, we have this div with the ID root, and now you see here the markups. Here you see the amazing feature of the React. The div with the ID root is totally empty in the index.html file, but the content is there, which is placed inside this div using the component. And don't worry if you are confused at this moment. We will reset this entire application and we'll prepare it so that we can code from the scratch. Now, another important tag in this index.html file is this script tag, which is trying to add or call this main.jsx file, which is inside this source directory. And this main.jsx file is the entry point to the application. So let's now expand the source directory, and here you will find the main.jsx files. Let's go inside this file and study the content. So like I said, main.jsx file is the entry point to the application. This file is actually a link between the index.html and the components. You might be thinking, how could it be an entry point? Here comes the answer. In the main.jsx, we import the create root from the React DOM library and the sub library client. And then using the create root, we select the div with the id root using the get element by id function. And once the div with the id root is selected, we apply the render function on it. And inside the render function, we put our components. And the only component, which is the default component we are rendering at this point, is app component. A component is nothing, just a JavaScript code in a different file. So you see the main.jsx file is actually providing a bridge between two files, the index file and the component file. In the next section of this lecture, we will delete everything from this file and we write this code from scratch, because this code is very important and you need to memorize it. So main.jsx file is the middle file or the entry point file. And at this moment, it is trying to render or insert this component inside the div with the id root. And the div with the id root exists in this index.html file. Let's now go inside this app component and study its content. And like I said, a component is just a JavaScript code placed in a different file. So here we have the component file. The name of the file is app.jsx. Now here we have the content, the web content that you see on the default page. Here on this default page, all the markups, HTML markups, or the data or the content is coming from app component. Now you see, a component is nothing, just a normal JavaScript function that returns the HTML markups. In the next section, we will delete this default component and create our own component so that we could start coding from scratch. What other files do we have in this source folder? We have a CSS file for the component. So component has its own CSS file, and we have a CSS file for this index.html. Index.css is a global CSS file because it applies on the index.html, while app.css is a local CSS file which is only for this app component. So my friends, that was a detailed overview of all the files and the folders that we have in a ReactJS application. And I hope you now have better understanding and feeling yourself comfortable with the Flex application architecture. Let's now move on to the second section of this lecture. In the second section, we will simply get rid of all the extra code and the files that we have, and we'll prepare applications so that we could start coding our own project. The first file we are going to remove from here is this app component, the default component. We don't want it. We will write our own component. So delete this file and its CSS file. You can also remove the assets folder. We have a React logo inside it. We can keep index.css file for the global CSS, but the CSS that we have inside this file are not needed anymore. So we are going to delete all the CSS. Now we move inside the main.jsx file. This file is the entry point and we usually write its code by ourselves. So I'm going to delete all the code that we have in the main.jsx file. The index file should be the same. We are not going to touch this file. Here we have the HTML template and the div with the id root. And here we're trying to add the main.jsx file. And here you see our page running in the browser, no content in it. The application is totally reset. Now we can start coding our own project. The first step should be to establish the connection and code main.jsx file so that we could render the components. The minimum import in main file is a create root object from the React DOM client library. And the syntax is import create root from React DOM, and the sub library is client. Once we have imported the create root object, we can use it to grab and apply the render function on the div with the ID root. So using the create root, we will grab the div element which has a ID root, and then we'll further call the random function on it. That's it. This is the minimum structure of the main.jsx file that you need to remember. Now, inside the render function, we can render HTML as well as component. For example, you want to render an h1 tag here with the text hello world. As see on the output, hello world appears on the page. Now, inside the render function, if I try to render another tag, the React will complain because we cannot render multiple tags side by side. We need to put them in a single container. And for that, so we can simply take a div element or any other element that can be the parent. We can also use the fragments like this. And so you see the output in the browser. Just remember this rule. Multiple elements can't be rendered side by side. They must be inside a single parent. It's a GSX rule, and we are not discussing GSS in this lecture. Let's move on. As you know, in other programming languages, there are multiple ways to do a single thing. And so you can also do in the React. For example, we can grab the create root object in a variable, and then using the root reference variable, we can simply call the render function on it, right? So things are the same. And instead of using the get element by ID method, you can also use query selector method with the selector root. So you see there are several ways to do a single thing, and the output is the same in the browser. That was all about how do we prepare the main.jsx file, the entry point file. Let's now move on and talk about the components. So like I told you before, a component is nothing just a JavaScript function that returns a JSX. So let's have an overview of a component before we code it in a different component file. So create a JavaScript function and name it hello component. And this component will simply return the JSX. So copy the JSX from here and simply paste it inside the hello component function. So very straightforward code, a function with the name component that returns some HTML markups. Our component is now ready to be called inside the render function. The output in the browser should be the same, but this time a component is rendered here inside the render function. And so you see the output in the browser. When we write the component, there is a naming rule we apply on it. That naming rule is Pascal convention. And that simply means the first letter of the name should be capitalized. Another important thing here is calling the component in the render function. As you can see here, we are calling the component just like we do in the JavaScript, right? It's a function call. But React has its own syntax. We usually put the angle brackets around the component and make it a self-closing tag. So it's the same as a normal function call in the JavaScript, but the syntax is different. In addition, all the self-closing tags must have this closing slash at the end. If I remove the slash, you see our React system will complain about it. Let's now move on, and finally I will show you how to put the component in a separate file. A component can be very large, and it's not a good solution to have your components here inside the main.jsx file. In addition, you can have hundreds and thousands of components on a single website project. So definitely it is not a solution to have your components stacking onto each other in a single file. Now we are going to move this component in a separate file. So we're going to create simply a file inside the source folder. The name of the file should be the same as the name of the component. Hello component.jsx. And inside this component file, we are going to place our component. So the component is now placed in a separate file and it is called here in the render function, but the output is not there. As you see, our web page has no content at all. So we don't see our component in the browser, although we are calling the component in the render function. The problem here is we are not exporting our component. So we simply need to make sure we export our component, which is now inside its own file, and there are several different ways to do that. One of the very common way which I see is called the export default in front of your function. So it's a very common way to export a component back to where it is being called. Now, when the component is exported, it should be imported in a file where we are trying to use it. In our case, the file is main.jsx. So now, and here we will use import direct. And then the name of the component we are trying to include here is hello component. And here comes the path, which starts from the period and slash sign. The period and the slash simply indicates I am importing these components from my own files and not from the third-party library package, just like we do here. React DOM client is a third-party library package. And at the time when we import the component, we can also change its name. But the convention is don't do that and keep everything consistent and easy to handle. Now you see everything is working. Here is output of our page. Our component is now as its separate file. It is exported from the file and imported in another file. So my friends, that was a detailed lecture and you learned the basic structure and the application structure of the React.js application and to prepare the React.js application so that you can start coding your own. I will see you in some other tutorials. Thanks for watching.